By the end of that afternoon in Tokyo, the challenge was already over. No referee announced it. No crowd understood exactly when it ended. Those who were present would later agree on only one detail. The woman who stepped forward with decades of samurai training did not fall, did not bleed, and did not speak again about what happened. Bruce Lee did not raise his voice. He did not demonstrate a technique. He simply stood where he was invited to stand. And when it was finished, no second attempt was ever requested. What occurred was not a fight. It was a correction. Tokyo in 1971 did not announce itself loudly. It did not need to. The city moved with contained confidence shaped by recovery, discipline, and continuity. Modern structures rose beside older halls without argument. Progress existed, but it did not interrupt tradition. It stepped around it. The training hall where the gathering took place reflected this balance. It was not public in the ordinary sense. There were no posters, no schedules, no advertisements. Those who entered did so by introduction, not curiosity. Shoes were placed carefully. Voices lowered without instruction. The room itself was plain. Tatami mats worn smooth at the edges. Wooden beams darkened by years of humidity and repetition. No mirrors. No banners. What authority existed here was assumed, not displayed. This was a space shaped by certainty. Those present that day were not spectators in the modern sense. They were practitioners, instructors, senior students, and observers tied to lineage. People who measured credibility not by reputation alone, but by who had taught you and who had taught them. Names mattered less than transmission. At the center of that certainty stood the woman. She was not introduced with ceremony. She did not need it. Her presence carried the weight of institutional recognition. Years of classical training, adherence to form, and familiarity with weapons that required patience more than speed. Her movements, even while standing still, reflected structure. Nothing wasted, nothing improvised. To the room, she represented continuity. This context mattered, because the challenge that would later be spoken of did not emerge from hostility. It arose from confidence, from the assumption that mastery is cumulative, and that systems refined over generations eventually reach completion. In such environments, deviation is tolerated only until it claims equivalence. Bruce Lee's arrival disrupted nothing outwardly. There was no dramatic entrance, no change in posture among those seated. Some recognized him immediately. Others knew him only by reputation, filtered through magazines, film reels, and conversations that often ended with polite dismissal. Too fast. Too modern, too individual. He was observed more than welcomed. What stood out to witnesses was not his energy, but his restraint. He spoke briefly. He listened longer. He did not scan the room as if measuring opponents. He stood as someone accustomed to being evaluated without comment. In a space built on certainty, this mattered because certainty does not announce itself as rigid. It presents itself as complete, and completeness does not rush to prove itself. The environment that afternoon was calm, almost comfortable, yet beneath it sat an unspoken assumption that whatever occurred, the structure of knowledge in that room would remain intact. No one expected confrontation. But tradition, when confronted with something it cannot immediately classify, often responds not with force, but with a test. The room was ready for one. The test did not begin with a challenge. It began with observation. Bruce Lee was not treated as a guest, nor as an intruder. He occupied a quieter position, acknowledged, yet held at a distance. Those present did what they had been trained to do. They watched without expression, without invitation, without judgment made visible. In that room, reputation traveled slowly. Some knew his name from Hong Kong cinema, though few admitted it openly. Others knew fragments of his teaching philosophy, often reduced through repetition, into something easier to dismiss. There were whispers of speed, of unconventional drills, of ideas that placed function above form. None of this aligned comfortably with the environment. Lineage did. The woman represented that lineage clearly. She was not the youngest in the room, nor the oldest. She occupied a precise middle, experienced enough to carry authority, active enough to enforce it. Her posture was not confrontational. It was assured. Witnesses would later say she did not look at Bruce Lee as a rival. She looked at him as a variable. Her training had been long and structured, years measured not by competition, but by correction. Forms refined through repetition until deviation felt foreign. Weapons training had taught her distance and consequence. Empty hand work had taught her balance and patience. She was not aggressive because she did not need to be. When she moved closer, it was not to threaten. It was to clarify boundaries. The exchange that followed was brief. No raised voices. No dramatic framing. A few words were spoken, polite, controlled, and formal. The kind of language that carries challenge without hostility. An offer, presented as an inquiry. Would you be willing to demonstrate? Not can you fight. Not do you believe your system works. Demonstrate. This distinction mattered. Demonstration implied structure. Rules, even if unspoken. A contained space where knowledge could be measured without spectacle. It suggested that whatever Bruce Lee represented could be examined and either validated or quietly set aside. Bruce Lee did not hesitate. He did not agree enthusiastically, nor defensively. Witnesses noted the absence of preparation. No stretching. No pacing. No visible shift in mindset. He acknowledged the request with a slight nod, as if accepting something already decided. What was notable was what he did not ask. He did not inquire about rules. He did not request conditions. He did not seek clarification on intent. This unsettled some in the room. Traditionally, such encounters involved careful framing, mutual understanding of limits, a shared structure within which both sides could operate. Bruce Lee's acceptance without negotiation suggested either ignorance or confidence that structure was unnecessary. The woman adjusted her position slightly. Not forward, not back, just enough to signal readiness. Those watching felt the shift. The room did not grow louder. It grew quieter. The kind of silence that emerges when certainty senses scrutiny. This was not authority asserting itself through force. This was authority preparing to verify itself. Two systems now face each other. One built on preservation. One built on reduction. At this stage, no one believed the outcome was uncertain. That belief would not survive the next few minutes. No signal was given. There was no formal beginning, no command to start. What occurred next unfolded the way many things do in disciplined spaces, through mutual recognition rather than instruction. The distance between them was modest, not ceremonial, not intimate. The kind of space that suggests possibility without commitment. Those watching recognized it immediately. This was not a performance distance. It was a working one. The woman's stance was familiar to the room. Balanced, rooted, her weight distributed evenly, shoulders relaxed, spine aligned. Nothing about it suggested urgency. It was the posture of someone who trusted structure to carry the outcome. Bruce Lee stood differently. Not incorrectly, just differently. His posture lacked the markers the room expected. No formal guard, no pronounced rooting. His hands rested where they fell naturally, neither raised nor concealed. To some observers, this appeared casual. To others, unfinished. What was missing unsettled them. Silence settled into the space between breaths. The audience, if they could be called that, did not shift or whisper. Everyone understood that any movement now would matter more than speech. Time stretched. This was a moment where, in more familiar encounters, energy announces itself, where tension sharpens into visible intent, where bodies telegraph decisions before they are made. None of that happened. Instead, witnesses later described the sensation of waiting without knowing for what. The woman advanced first, not suddenly, not aggressively. A measured step designed to test response, to see how the unfamiliar system would interpret traditional pressure. Her movement was correct, textbook in the most serious sense of the word. Bruce Lee did not retreat. He did not advance either. He adjusted. It was a shift so small that several people missed it entirely. A fractional change in angle. A repositioning of weight that altered the line between them without appearing to do so. The woman paused, not because she was threatened, but because something had changed without declaring itself. This pause was critical. In structured training, pauses occur by choice. You stop when you have arrived at the correct position. You stop because the system has guided you there. This pause was different. It arrived uninvited. Those closest noticed first. The way her shoulders tightened, not in fear, but in recalculation. The way her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. She had not lost ground, yet the ground no longer felt reliable. Bruce Lee remained silent. He did not capitalize on the pause. He did not press forward. He allowed the moment to exist. This created pressure of a different kind. In public challenges, escalation is expected. Action justifies attention. Here, inaction began to carry weight. The longer nothing happened, the more the imbalance became apparent. The room leaned inward, not physically, but perceptually. Awareness sharpened. Breathing slowed. The woman adjusted again. A second step, slightly faster. Still controlled. Still within the language she trusted. This time, Bruce Lee moved. Not with speed that impressed. Not with force that displaced. His movement was almost dismissible until its effect registered. He was no longer where she had accounted for him to be. No strike had landed. No block had been seen. Yet the relationship between them had been altered decisively. Distance, timing, and access had been reorganized without spectacle. Several witnesses later struggled to describe this moment, not because it was complex, but because nothing dramatic had occurred. And yet, something essential had ended. The stillness that followed was heavier than before. Because now, only one of them understood why. Those who expected resolution to impact would later admit confusion. Nothing resembling a decisive strike had occurred. No throw, no audible contact, no visible dominance in conventional sense. And yet, the demonstration had already passed its point of return. Bruce Lee's position was now unmistakable, not aggressive, not encroaching, but final. He stood close enough to remove options without appearing to take any. The space the woman relied on to initiate action no longer existed in the way she understood it. This was noticed unevenly. The most experienced observers registered it immediately. Their eyes moved not to hands or feet, but to alignment, to the way angles had collapsed, to the absence of viable continuation. The woman did not move, not because she was restrained, but because restraint had become irrelevant. Any action she initiated would now begin from a disadvantage she had not consented to. This was a correction. Bruce Lee had not defeated technique. He had made technique unnecessary. The effect was subtle but undeniable. Her breathing changed, slightly quicker, then deliberately slowed. She recalibrated her stance, but the recalibration itself revealed something unsettling. Every adjustment confirmed the same conclusion. She was late, not in reaction, but in premise. The training she carried assumed exchange, assumed engagement, assumed that mastery revealed itself through interaction. What she faced now required none of those assumptions. Bruce Lee did not pursue completion. He did not close distance further. He did not withdraw to invite re-engagement. He simply remained where effectiveness already existed, in that stillness. The demonstration continued without movement. Those present later described a peculiar sensation, like witnessing the end of a conversation before the final sentence was spoken. The logic was complete. The words would add nothing. The woman's gaze shifted, briefly, not to Bruce Lee's hands or center line, but to the space behind him, as if confirming there was nowhere else the encounter could go. This glance did not go unnoticed. It marked the moment when authority changed form. Not transferred, not taken. Redefined. Bruce Lee inclined his head slightly. Not a bow, not a gesture of submission or dominance. It was acknowledgement of effort, of seriousness, of the encounter having reached its natural conclusion. The woman stepped back, not sharply, not in retreat. A single step that restored physical distance but confirmed psychological finality. She did not speak. She did not attempt explanation. The room remained silent. No one clapped. No one moved to reset the space. Because no reset was possible. What had been demonstrated could not be undone by repetition. There would be no second attempt, no clarification round. The method remained unspoken, but its implications were now present in the room. The moment had passed quietly, and precisely because of that, it would not fade. The silence after the step back was different from the silence before. Earlier, it had carried expectation. Now it carried resolution. Those present did not look to Bruce Lee for confirmation. They looked to the woman. In traditional spaces, authority does not declare itself. It is reflected by those who carry it. Her response would determine how the moment would be absorbed. She did not challenge what had occurred. She did not explain it away. She did not attempt to restore balance through formality or instruction. Instead, she did something far more telling. She remained still. Her posture did not collapse, but it softened, not from defeat, but from recognition. The kind that arrives when effort is no longer the limiting factor, when confidence realizes it has been depending on something that is no longer present. What had been removed was not skill. It was certainty. This distinction mattered deeply to those watching. In many challenges, the losing side seeks refuge in external causes, rules, conditions, unfamiliarity. None of that surfaced here. There was no visible frustration, no attempt to regain narrative control. The woman's training had taught her to recognize finality when it appeared. Several witnesses later recalled that this was the moment that stayed with them the longest, not the repositioning, not the adjustment of distance, but the stillness of someone who understood that continuing would only confirm what had already been revealed. Bruce Lee did not fill the silence. He did not offer explanation, reassurance, or instruction. To do so would have reintroduced hierarchy, and hierarchy was no longer the point. The demonstration had not been about replacing one authority with another. It had been about removing unnecessary assumptions. Slowly, others in the room began to move, not toward either participant, but back into themselves. Eyes dropped, shoulders shifted, breaths resumed. This was not discomfort. It was processing. Traditional systems rely on repetition to stabilize understanding. What had just occurred resisted repetition. There was no sequence to memorize, no technique to isolate. The effectiveness lay in timing, positioning, and decision-making that existed before action. For some, this was unsettling. For others, it was quietly liberating. The woman eventually turned away, not abruptly, not dismissively. She addressed no one. Her departure required no announcement. In that space, withdrawal did not signify loss. It signified closure. Bruce Lee remained a moment longer. He did not claim the space. He did not linger. His presence did not expand. When he left, it was with the same economy with which he had entered. Afterward, the room did not immediately return to routine. Training resumed later that day, but with subtle differences. Movements were slightly more cautious. Distances measured more carefully. Corrections offered with less certainty. Something had shifted beneath the structure, not broken. Shifted, and structures once shifted do not return to their original alignment. The room did not preserve the moment. There were no records kept, no formal acknowledgement added to a curriculum, no photograph pinned to a board. By the end of the week, the tatami mats were cleaned, the air returned to routine, and the space resumed its familiar rhythm. And yet, the incident did not disappear. It surfaced in fragments, not as a story told loudly, but as an omission noticed quietly. Certain drills were no longer emphasized the way they had been before. Distance was discussed differently. Pauses were allowed to linger longer than tradition required. Instructors corrected less through insistence and more through adjustment. No one cited Bruce Lee by name during these changes. That would have made the lesson external. Instead, the teaching became internalized, absorbed without attribution, as the most durable lessons often are. Those who had been present rarely spoke about it in full. When asked, they would offer partial recollections, a comment about timing, a remark about positioning. Occasionally, a single sentence. It ended before it began. Years later, accounts diverged on details. Some claimed there had been a brief exchange of movement. Others insisted nothing visible occurred at all. A few remembered it as a test that revealed more about the room than about the visitor. What remained consistent was the absence of exaggeration. No one claimed humiliation. No one described violence. No one framed it as conquest. It was remembered as a moment when something was understood and therefore no longer needed to be proven. Bruce Lee himself never publicized the encounter. It did not appear in interviews or demonstrations. There was no attempt to integrate it into his growing public image. For him, it was not an achievement to be cataloged. It was a confirmation already complete. The woman, for her part, continued teaching. Her reputation did not suffer. If anything, it deepened. Students later noted a subtle shift in her instruction, a greater emphasis on awareness before action, on choice before technique. She never referenced Tokyo in 1971, but the influence appeared in how she corrected distance, how she discouraged unnecessary exchange. The encounter did not create followers. It created restraint. Over time, the story became less about who stood in the room and more about what did not happen there. No escalation, no insistence, no need to win. In martial circles, where dominance is often measured by visibility, this absence became the point. It suggested a different form of mastery, one that concludes without display, that leaves no spectacle to argue over and no damage to explain away. Those who heard the story years later often asked the same question: what exactly did he do? The answer, when given honestly, was unsatisfying. Very little. And that, perhaps, was why the lesson endured. Not because it could be copied, but because it could be recognized. The room in Tokyo no longer exists in the same form. Buildings change. Lineages adapt. Names fade. But among those who understand the difference between action and necessity, the story persists not as legend, but as reminder that sometimes the most decisive demonstrations leave nothing behind, except silence, and a recalibration that lasts far longer than applause ever could.